My name is Yuri Zaremba. I'm a user experience leader at Facebook and also a private design mentor, helping designers up-level their careers. You're here because of my initiative called UX Career Support, where I have several groups across LinkedIn and Facebook. And we do these monthly what I call group mentorship sessions, just because I get bombarded with so many people that I decided to just like make one big one, and it's kind of turned into this huge party. And I invite people that I admire and personally know. Like, these aren't like random guests. These are people that have been a part of my life and that I know their stuff. And today, our guest is Lee Allen Arredondo. She's a UX leader at Brooks Running and the host of the UX Cake podcast. But I'm not going to do her intro for her. Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Yuri. And I think it's an awesome thing that you're doing, by the way. Mentorship has always been something that I have been a big promoter of. And the one-to-many model is kind of is a really great thing to do. So anyway, yeah, I'm Lee. I've been leading design and research and teams for over 20 years. So a wide variety of companies, from startups and agencies to larger companies like Amazon, which is how I connected with Yuri, and now heading up UX at Brooks Running, like Yuri mentioned. And I should note, I've also been a consultant, UX design, UX research, and UX strategy for probably almost half of those 20 years. So a really wide variety, which is why we're talking about unconventional career paths in UX today. The last few years, I've been branching off a little bit more to fuel my passion, which is coaching and mentoring, which the coaching I do through my leadership coaching practice. And then the mentoring was really kind of the impetus for starting the UX Cake podcast, which is on a break for a month. For about a year. It's been on a break, but should be coming back soon. So that's me in a nutshell. And I'm in Seattle, if you didn't notice, or if you tuned in after I said the woot to Seattle.
Thanks for that, Lee. And that was a very humble call out for the UX Cake podcast, but I do want to give you props for that, because like for anyone that's not familiar with it, UX Cake has got like tons and tons and tons of interviews, and it's one of the more popular design related podcasts now available. It was like over 100,000 downloads at this point. Like, it's huge.
Yeah, I hit 100,000 downloads shortly after I went on break at the beginning of COVID. So, and it still continues of its own volition. So I'm excited to generate ideas for bringing it back soon.
Well, congratulations. Hopefully we can get some of that goodness out of this conversation. So as you mentioned, today's topic is unconventional career paths in UX, and this was actually your idea from a little conversation that we had earlier, and I loved it because I've been getting so many messages about unique backgrounds. Grade school teachers, engineers, architects. Like really, really random backgrounds. So, to get us started, can you let us know what your career path looked like? Because I know that it's not exactly conventional in its own right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So for me, I like to say for me, design started not as a career, but really as an adventure. It was what I was doing to make my way through school, pay my way through school. And school itself ended up being, I definitely took the scenic route through college. By the time, and that took me about 10 years to go through multiple majors. um, but all that time I was working in design. So started as a production artist, because I had a job doing that in high school. And that led to graphic design, which led to UI design, which then led to software design. So by the time I finished film school, 10 years after I started school, um, I already had a fairly lucrative career as a software designer. And so I think because of that experience, from the very get-go, I wasn't really kind of keyed into titles, right? UX actually wasn't a thing yet. That sort of happened around 1999, 2000. Um, so I think that unconventional, just kind of going where the work looked interesting,
Mhm.
that stayed with me through my career. And again, uh, like, yes, it came from the design background and became the interaction and UX designer. But my career itself has taken a lot of twists and turns, and usually circumstantial. So, for example, I got into research because it was something that we really needed to do, and we didn't have a researcher. And I saw the need. And then through later opportunities, I had a chance to learn from some of the best researchers in Seattle. Um, and uh, and that led to strategy, because design plus research plus business basically
Mhm.
equals UX strategy. Um, and meanwhile, I was also building teams. And like I mentioned, I've gone back and forth from full-time roles to consulting. Um, and so I'm very familiar with the unconventional background, also because I've been on the hiring side so many times. And the unconventional career path, it's not new, right? Um, that was something that's been a part of UX ever since I started. And
Mhm.
I was an example of it, but there's a lot of us out there. So um, there weren't a lot of school programs. There was maybe HCI, human centered, or human computer interaction is what it was called back then. Um, so it's a discipline that has had unconventional backgrounds from the get-go. And I see a lot of folks having a lot of questions around, how do
Mhm.
I tell the narrative of my diverse background, all of which, you've got experience that you're bringing with you. It's important, it actually becomes your unique story. um, how do you tell that story? And I had to struggle with that myself. So I thought it would be a great conversation for us today.
I love that. There's two bullets that I want to unpack with you there. So first, just I'd love to reinforce with you that there's no like one size fits all template for design careers. Like if you are interested in, and not just design, but like UX all up. So like a lot of people that I talk to like are looking for that magic formula. Like here's step one, two, three, four, five, and depending on who you talk to, like you can get some ideas of formulas, but there is no one template. So, similar to you, Lee, like I my design background is like similarly unconventional in that like I technically don't have a design background. Like I didn't go to school for it. And my last job before becoming a designer was a sales and marketing coordinator. And that ended up turning into front end engineering. And then as a front end engineer, I ended up transitioning into product design about 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I guess at this point. But I love that you're just like how you're articulating that there's no one way to get to where you're at right now, right? There's probably several ways you could have landed. And the second thing is that narrative is a lot of the time it feels like we try to run away from our narrative and take someone else's narrative because you've heard it so many times that you think that that's how, you know, you either get that job or you get that promotion. You know, for me, that was for a long time, that was running away from the fact that I had no formal design education. So like I was super self-conscious of that for the longest time. So I would just find creative ways to hide it. Now it's part of my narrative, and I found that it's actually one of my strengths, and hiring managers are super attracted to it. So I love that, you know, you mentioned narrative there as well. Moving on, what are some of the different directions that folks could take their UX careers? So I feel like what I'm seeing a lot of is that when people think UX, especially in my communities, it seems like that they kind of put it in a box of like, either I'm like going to be a designer or a researcher, or I'm a research designer because I came out of a boot camp. But can you tell us about like what are the other opportunities inside of UX? Because it is a very big field.
It is. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about the last couple days too, is kind of how hung up people get on job titles. Why does it have to say UX? Does it have, or, you know, I guess that's a question to the folks in the audience. Does it have to say UX in the title? Or is what you want to do working in a way that is human-centered, user-centered, bringing the best product to people, or solving problems for people? So, you know, and if the answer is yes, it has to be UX design. Mm-hmm. Even that title is like, sometimes some places it's a product designer, some places it might be an information architect, some places even still use the title UI engineer, or not UI engineer, because that is usually front end, but there's just always, you know, there's a lot of decoding that has to happen when we look at titles that are out there, which folks on the audience probably already know. But yeah, there's writing. So there's a lot of folks, I have a couple friends actually who came from a marketing background and studied UX and really felt their strength was in writing, was communication. And they found roles doing UX writing or content strategy, which is adjacent. I kind of, there's a lot of things that are adjacent to UX. So there's the writing, there's prototyping. That's a great way for developers to get a little bit closer to the design process, often prototyping roles. There's UX PMs, and there are product managers who, I wish more product managers had user-centered design background or training, because those two things, design and product, can be so powerful together. Is that kind of what you're looking for, is like all the breadth that people could potentially be looking at when they're wanting to get in this?
So it just kind of shows, right, that it's not just about pushing pixels or even interviewing people, right? So like, you know, UX writing, so is a whole competency. You mentioned prototyping, which sometimes is also known as being a technologist. That's a great kind of bridge if you have a coding background and you want to get into UX, as you mentioned. One other role that I'll add to that pile that I think is a really cool one that not a lot of people know about is becoming a producer. So if you have any kind of a coordination background, particularly larger companies have what are called UX producer roles, where really you're just coordinating and making sure that projects are delivering. So it's a little bit different from being a PM in that you're not creating so much creating the requirements as much as managing operations.
Oh yeah, okay. I was trying to think of other titles I've heard. Studio manager
Hmm.
is another one. UX project manager. Um, there's also program manager roles, which, wow, that's also, I've heard so many definitions for that title. But these are, I guess it's probably frustrating to be thinking about getting into UX, or if, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of folks in the audience who are already in UX or adjacent roles who are thinking about, how can I advance my career?
Hmm.
Um, so uh, I'd be curious. I don't know if you ever do this, but I'd be curious to hear from folks through the, the is there a way to get emojis from people in Zoom? I know that's a thing in Teams where
Yeah,
people.
and it's more of a Facebook and Teams thing, but maybe in
Oh, okay.
chat.
Oh,
Uh,
in the yeah chat, just like, are you already in UX and you're looking to, like move to the next level, um, or another level, or I think some folks who get into UX design,
mhm.
it's really funny because there's probably so many people watching who want to be a UX designer
Yeah,
because they make the decisions. And then you get into UX design, you realize, oh,
you don't
somebody
make
else is making
decisions. Yeah,
decisions.
yeah, yeah. It's not a great role for control freaks.
That's
But
true. You have to be, this is another really great topic. And in fact, there is a podcast on this, which is influencing without authority. So that's
mhm,
a soft skill that if you've learned that from some other work experience, you can really utilize that in UX.
yeah, that's like our last guest, Calvin Wynn, which you know really well. That
Mhm.
was something that he was carrying a torch for, is just like not think, just reminding everyone that the title that you think is going to get you the authority is not going to actually get you the authority. Like that you can be in, like if you can't influence now, you won't be able to influence later.
It's a skill to learn. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um, next up is we have everything from, as I said, like back end engineers to grade school teachers in attendance today. Um, and whether they're in kind of like the beginning of their career or still considering it, like how can someone best leverage their non-UX background?
Yeah, and um, I love this especially because it's so important. There are thousands of folks who are trying to get into UX now.
Mhm.
It's proliferated, um, and I think uh, it's particularly difficult when you're coming in entry level, and yet you have work experience from another field. So it's super valuable, I think, to utilize all of your experience, academic
Mhm.
and work, to really kind of create your own unique, like, what is it about you that's unique and keeps that is going to make you stand out, um, from the other thousands that are applying for
Yep.
the same role, um, or at least hundreds more than likely
Yep.
applying for the same role. Um, so I I look at other work experience in a couple different buckets. And it's the hard skills and the soft skills. So I think hard skills being, for example, a specialty that you might have been an architect. I saw someone, at least one person in chat,
Mhm.
say architect moving into UX. So architectural background, um, might the fact that you are familiar with the blueprint and drafting, is like, I see the how you can utilize that in the story that you tell about building wireframes, for example. Creating a foundation for design, which is where you actually work out the design, right? Is in that foundational wireframe stage. So that, and product management or an analytical background, you understand the language of business, right? And KPIs and OKRs and all the other acronyms. And or a sales and marketing background. There's the communication skills that you have, and you also have an advantage in being able to kind of promote an idea or persuade. That was something I know you and I talked about, because it's a skill that you have, and you do it very well. And then there's sort of the more soft skills, right? So maybe you, in a previous role, but it wasn't in design, you created great outcomes by working across silos and building relationships across teams. Super valuable. Possibly you excel at execution and detail. Or perhaps you've demonstrated design thinking, to solve other problems, not necessarily like UX. Maybe you were in healthcare. I've seen this, solving problems that had outcomes that really benefited either patients or in the internal teams.
I'd love to touch on that.
Things like that.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that for a second. Like how, because when you're coming from a very like vertical specific background, like for example, healthcare, like it's easy to get caught up talking about what you did from the lens of what you were doing, right? Like, so maybe you're coordinating something or something. So you're tempted to talk about just the job that you did. Can you speak to how, like, you could take these very non-design accomplishments and flip them to come from the lens of a design skill? Because I see this as, like, I've also seen the extreme where people get so sucked into talking about their past lives that they're unable to connect the dots to, like, how is this relevant to me being a candidate for a design job? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm pulling out of what you were talking about is also something I've seen where people are kind of focused on what they did versus the outcome.
Yeah.
So what was the outcome? And what was the value that you brought to that outcome? What was it that you were doing that created a better outcome? For example, can I talk about my journey mapping process here? Because I think this is a really great way to start finding that thread and
go ahead.
Connecting the dots like you were talking about. So this is something that I have found personally, I found super helpful when I was struggling with how do I tell a cohesive story of me as a leader and my strengths and with this like really diverse background. So and it's a career journey map. Maybe there are some folks here who are familiar with creating user journey maps. So this is a little bit similar. You can do it in a lot of different formats, but the way that I did it really looked like a path. Almost like a mind map, right? You're identifying, write down everything that you've done. Like start your journey at the beginning and write with that, the first thing, like, how did you get there? Like even like, how did you get the job? Because some people don't realize until they start seeing the thread that, oh, wow, I get all my jobs through word of mouth, for example. Well, that means you're really good at relationship building and people want to work with you again, like, so that's the kind of thread you can see when you do this. But identify what were the things that you were succeeding at there, not just like the tasks that you did, but where were you bringing value. um, what was it that you liked there?
Mhm.
What was it that you didn't like there? Why did you leave? Whether that was of your own volition or not. um, and do that throughout your your every work situation, and potentially even starting with your academic career. um, and I think that what the value of that is, you start to identify the threads, right, that you
Mhm.
can turn into a narrative of, okay, let's say healthcare. First of all, you might identify, you should hopefully identify some areas that you might want to look into. So if your background is in healthcare and you're going into, you did a UX boot camp, and you want a UX design role or UX
Mhm.
research role, it would make a lot of sense to focus on working in the healthcare industry, because your specific skill set is going to be so much more valuable than someone whose background, for example, was e-commerce, um, because you are coming in, you can tell those stories, and the people that you're going to be telling these stories to see the
Mhm.
value, right? So try to match your experience with where you're going in a transition. I'd say in a transition period, it does help to be able to pull things from your experience that you can leverage like that. Not just not just skills, but also knowledge transfer that
And
you're
you
bringing.
actually have a worksheet for this, right?
So the worksheet, yeah, I do have a worksheet which isn't up on my site yet. The worksheet that is up on my site, I think, is a really important part of it, which is values alignment. I think
Mhm.
kind of this is one part of the puzzle if you're looking to make a transition and tell your narrative. The other piece is really identifying your values and aligning your values,
Mhm.
and identifying where you are in and misaligned in your life and work right now. um,
Yep.
and that is a worksheet. I love worksheets, but that is a worksheet that's on my website. um,
And we're gonna make sure to send a link to it after this call. So don't worry, everyone, you're gonna get a copy. Um, I agree with you 100% about kind of like identifying that connective fiber across your career, because it can really be illuminating and help you be a lot more confident even when you're interviewing. So like for me, I went through that exercise. I did it a little differently, but the gist is the same. Where I just effectively created a timeline of like my entire life from a skill point of view, not from a professional point of view. And what I found was I didn't even notice it, but like my entire life from when I was a teenager, I was building communities. So that like I literally built like 6 or 7 communities, like even before UX career support. So like it was when I was interviewing at Facebook, that was one of the call outs, is that like, since I was 15, I've been building communities. And I didn't even realize that until I went through, that retrospective exercise. So I love that. Um, so I think I'll take it to one last question, and then we'll go into Q&A. And everyone, if you're in the Facebook group, there's a poll inside of the event. So make sure that you have voted on your questions and you have your questions in there. If you're not in the Facebook group, just use the Q&A feature here in Zoom. So right in your bottom toolbar, the black bar underneath the video, there's 2 little bubbles that say Q&A. So get your questions in there if you're not in Facebook. If you're in Facebook, do it in the event. So last question here is actually, I'm hoping we can maybe speed through two questions.
okay.
So one is, do you have any tips for folks that are discouraged? There's a lot of doom and gloom right now because of expectations that people were given, coming into programs, or expectations that they gave themselves just because they don't know any better yet. around like what it takes to really kick off your UX career. And especially folks coming from other careers where, you know, they're effectively starting another life. It can be very discouraging, and like a lot of people feel like that there is no place in the UX field for them. Can you speak to that a little bit, and let them know how to um, what what they should be watching out for and how they can start building their confidence?
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting. We chatted about this briefly a little while ago, and we were talking about the importance of um, continuing to actually do the work, which can be hard
Hmm.
if you're looking for a job. You know, kind of the general advice is go find a hackathon, or uh, work with you know, find a nonprofit to work with, volunteer your, those are actually really great. Like, find as much work as you can,
Hmm.
whether you're getting paid or not, right?
Yep.
Um, but okay, there's two pieces in there. One is create your own project, right? Just make sure that you are working. I remembered after we spoke that one of the things that I did that actually, this is a long time ago, but it actually helped me move from, you know, a graphic designer to an interaction designer was um, I started creating my own. They were this is back CD-ROMs, but you could do it on the internet. I have seen other people do this. I created my own app basically, and
Hmm.
it was for something I was super interested in. It was something that it was like cooking across the U.S. Um, and so that actually became part of my portfolio. The other thing that I think is super important is to make sure you're getting feedback,
Hmm.
because that way you're actually learning. And this can be a really hard thing if you're kind of on your own. You you want to make sure you're able to get critical feedback, and so yeah, you should be asking any cohort that you're part of, any community you're part of. I think Slack is it. There's Slack groups where folks will ask for input on their projects that they're working
Hmm.
on. LinkedIn groups, I see a lot of that as well. And but like, get out there and talk to users, talk to
Yep.
the people who would be using this product, right?
Yep.
um, just get in front of as many people as you can, and that actually helps build your portfolio. And when you're doing work, I think
Hmm.
that really helps build, can, you know, keep your confidence up.
I love that. And I agree with you 100% that like, uh, especially early on, but I would argue like your entire career, but like, especially early on, like 80-90% of your anxiety should just be redirected into doing work, any kind of work, right? Because like there's so much stuff that is out of your control, and just like you just kind of have to be patient and things have to, you know, come together. But the one thing that you can be doing is actually truly becoming a good designer, right?
Mhm.
And you're not going to
Or
become a good
researcher or writer.
yeah, or researcher, writer, UXer, right? Like you're not gonna like getting that job isn't what is gonna make you deserve the job. You have to deserve the job first. And sometimes people get lucky, but you know, if you want to manufacture your own luck, like deserve the job by getting good enough. And you can get good enough just by practicing it long enough. And
Yeah.
I love your point about feedback, because if you know, for folks that want to go back into the video archives in the Facebook group or the LinkedIn group, we actually talk about, you know, that we have a lot of videos on like how to get design jobs, but we haven't talked about what you just talked about regarding feedback, and that's a really great point. So uh, I like, for me, like I had an early career turning point, like just a couple of years into my career, just as I was transitioning into product design, because I had I had found I guess I would call him a mentor, that was open to literally critiquing my work. I violated every NDA under the sun, but I didn't care because I was learning so much. And granted, this wasn't over VC, right? Like I had my laptop and I was getting designer feedback because I was doing it alone. But like that was like fundamental to the beginnings of my career, to have someone that knew what they were doing tell me what I didn't know what I was doing. Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And when you get that feedback, now you know you don't know it, and now you can go and learn. So we have lots of folks use the UX career support Facebook and LinkedIn groups for design feedback. But to take it a step further, if you ever get good feedback from somebody and like it was illuminating, connect with them. You could either do it via the UX career support Slack channel, or just DM them in Messenger, right? And just build a one-to-one relationship, and just flat out ask them if they'd be open to critiquing your work every once in a while, right? Like, instead of just doing it generically, like find a couple people that you trust that give good feedback.
Yeah.
And last one, and maybe we'll, I'm not going to talk on this one. This one's all you. It's just you've talked to hundreds of successful designers through your podcast at this point. Whether it's related to unconventional career paths or not, do you have any just like nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to pass on?
Sorry.
That's all right.
How many times do I have to say I'm doing a webinar from 10 to 11? So, don't have the contractors come during that time. Okay. So you want advice? I was a little bit distracted there. Tips
yeah, just a couple of tips and like just takeaways that you want to leave us that are based off of your hundreds of interviews on your podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we can tie it back to this, the topic of the unconventional career path, I think we gave some tips, which is, number one, identify your unique strengths, identify your unique experience that you bring to the table, identify your values, and so that you can make sure that you are creating a life that's aligned to your values. But putting those things together in a narrative, it's easier said than done. I can say, find all those things and connect the dots, find the insights. You're actually, maybe what you're actually doing is almost, you're presenting a narrative very similar to how you would have to if you were going to present a narrative of the user research that you just did. So maybe take a look at it from a less personal perspective and identify the insights in a way that tells the full story, and then sort of taking what you mentioned, Yuri, which is looking for people that whose opinions you trust, and getting feedback on your story. And that is going to, if you're getting feedback from people you trust and kind of iterating, then you're going to get to a place where you feel like you know and own your unique story. So that can be pretty powerful.
Thank you for that. So I think that's a wrap for the scripted questions. I think we'll transition now into Q&A. So thanks everybody for.
And there's so many questions.
Yeah, we're not going to
get
through them all. But I'm going to start with the Facebook group because that's where we have votes. So first question, and I think this is a good question, is how do you mention soft skills that you developed from a career in food service industry, retail, stuff like that? So like, it's one thing, I guess, like to add to this, like it's one thing to say like, okay, I was like a coordinator in healthcare, or I was a project manager at a construction company. Like you can kind of have a connection there, but how do you draw from things that are so separated from design? Like how would you go about, drawing from your experience in this example, food service or retail?
Yeah. Um, Also, so I feel like we did talk about that a little bit. Like identifying the soft skills that you built in your previous experience, and that could be something like the relationship building piece. You know how to bring people together from multiple teams across silos, maybe. And those sorts of things. I guess, you know, empathy, look at the things that are the soft skills that make people very successful in UX. And if you're not in UX, that might be difficult to know what that is, but they are things like the relationship building and building trust, being able to execute and attention to detail, um, being able to tell a story from research, being able to presentation skills are like super important.
Mhm.
Empathy. Empathy is a really big one. Showing how you have used empathy, I think, in a previous work experience might be something like, maybe you helped create a new system for that helped customers or internal teams, because you're really great at understanding the needs of others. So these may not have anything at all to do with UX, but these are things that would bring a lot of value to a user-centered role, if that
just to
is helpful.
just to add to that is you can also use them for behavioral question anecdotes, right? If you can't think of like a UX experience anecdote to an interview question, go back into your archives of your past life and see if there's an interesting example you can bring up from there. For example, if you're asked about, hey, can you tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a manager? Maybe you didn't have a conflict in your UX career, but you had one in your retail career, right? It's still applicable.
Yeah, for
And,
sure.
and the second thing is, use that experience to create unique metaphors and to color your processes. So like, for example, if you're a designer, how can your experience in the food industry uh, um, industry uh, influence your design process or your narrative in your portfolio? Maybe you could use those metaphors. Like a former colleague of mine, grew up in a household that had a beekeeping farm. So his entire deck and his entire brand, used beekeeping metaphors because that was a big part of his past life. Like, and that part's less to convince the other person that like, hey, like this is of the soft skills, and sometimes it's just about bubbling up and being an interesting person. Next question here, it's a little bit generic, but that's okay, I guess, is how do I become a researcher?
Oh,
Actually,
gosh.
I'm gonna
I think you
combine
could do a
two.
whole episode on how to
Yeah,
become a blank.
blank. Yeah, let's actually turn that into that. Like how do, because I in the questions I also see UX strategist, I also see service designer. So let's just turn that into how do I become a blank?
Yeah, yeah. Service design, yes, is also, one of those titles that we didn't mention before but could have. How do you become a blank? You start doing blank.
Mhm. Love that.
Um, First, you have to know what blank does, right? Designer, researcher, strategist.
Mhm.
Strategist is a funny one, because if you Google UX strategy, you're going to come up with a whole lot of different definitions for what that is.
Mhm.
There are a couple books now. Jamie Levy wrote the first one. I believe it was the first one. And there is an episode with Jamie Levy on UX Cake
Mhm.
podcast. So that actually kind of would be helpful. Those kind of things are going to be helpful for you to understand what a UX researcher really does. There's so many resources out there now on YouTube, and I mean, it's kind of a mess to just Google, like trying to read all the different things you're going to find. But I have found YouTube to be kind of helpful when I'm looking for more specific information. So for example, I mentioned that I'm coaching. Okay, I'm just going to give you an example of how you become an X when you're not 100% sure what X does. So I'm transitioning sort of to coaching. I mean, I've been doing leadership coaching for a long time as a manager, but now I'm doing it one-on-one with people who, and it's very different. So yes, I did training. I went through training like a lot of people here. You went through some UX boot camp. I went through coaching training, but I still am like, well, how do other people do it? And there's an amazing wealth of information out there on YouTube to just see, and podcasts. And people are just outright saying, here's what I do. And I know that it's out there for research as well. So first of all, find out what they do. Second of all, start doing it, like you and I talked about already. Whether you're doing it for nonprofits. I saw another question in there. How do you get a connection with a nonprofit? It's the same way you get a connection with anyone. I'm making it sound like it's easy. I know it's not easy, but find people, find nonprofits. They're out there, they have websites. And then, connect with people on LinkedIn.
But your point stands, is just like find a way to actually do the work. Like do it. Don't just like go and look for it and hope that you get it and then you do it, but like just start doing it and then find opportunities to apply that now that you know how to do it.
Yeah. Find out what it is, figure out how to do it, and start doing it. It's not as easy as that, but that is how you do it.
It'll take years, right? But like the answer is easy, but like the execution, like, it's not a 1 week thing. Like it's going to take several months, if not like a year or two. But it is a game plan. Next question here is.
And there's a really good one in the Q&A. So I want to make sure we have time to get to Jaspreet's question.
Oh, let's go with that. Go ahead.
Okay. Do people who come from unconventional backgrounds always start at entry-level UX jobs? Or are there cases where people with a particular kind of experience can begin their UX journey at a mid or senior level? Yes, there are. And it depends on what you're coming from and what you're trying to do. But I think you and I sort of talked about this too. Like you can find a role where product manager is a good example. You can be a product manager and transition into a UX product manager at the same level. Like that's a sideways move. And then, if you're still wanting to do more UX, then I've seen this happen. So that's what I'm talking about. Then you become a UX manager.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of UX managers who have never been a UX designer.
Yes, that's totally true. Even from several of my managers, and that doesn't necessarily hamper their performance either. That's the amazing part. And even as I mentioned, just like from my background as well, as I think back on it, I've actually never been a junior UX designer. I didn't realize it until this question.
I mean, like you talk about that you used to do, you moved into it, and you're also a really friggin' amazing designer. So like and you didn't go to school for it, but you are an amazing designer. And I can say that because you were on my team. So
I
uh,
appreciate that, but I wasn't always, right. So like it
sure,
was,
I'm sure you started
yeah, like some of my
before.
early work was, it was pretty rough. But like I just can't, like I just kind of realized that I, like when my first real job as a UX designer was when I went to Microsoft. And when I went to Microsoft, I started there as a front end engineer and then transitioned straight into being a mid-level product designer, because they didn't have any kind of junior level work, because like their bar was like you had to be at least mid-level. So because I had um, compatibility just based off of doing enough design work as a requirement of doing the front end engineering, like it was a pretty easy transition. So that's an example of like, if you like, similar to like the management example, is just if you have enough skills that overlap enough, it's not uncommon to make that transition. But if you're just coming from like a sheerly like I'm going to learn design, and I'm starting off as a designer, then you do generally have to start from the very beginning and work your way up.
Yeah, there are many, many cases where you do have to start as an entry level. Moving from visual designer to UX designer, though, I have
Yeah,
also seen kind of a sideways. Um,
that's another great example. Can you talk about a success story there? Because I get this one all the time. It's like, I'm a UI designer. How do I become a UX designer?
yeah, honestly, the best success stories I've ever seen are people who are either doing it they as a contractor. They just start getting their UI
Hmm.
designer, and then they get a contract where they're actually doing UX work.
Hmm.
um, or they're in a company where they're doing UI and they move into UX. And in fact, there's someone on my team at Brooks who was in that store, in that camp. um, and uh, so those are the two kind of circumstances. uh,
Hmm.
the woman who and in fact, the woman who is on my team, who was like a visual designer, and then she really got into UX. She was on the creative team at Brooks, and she just started learning UX. She didn't
Hmm.
I don't believe she ever did a boot camp. She just started, learning it and then
Hmm.
applying it and working for the UX team, while she was still doing her creative work, um, and building relationships with the product
Hmm.
team, and moved over, um, before I started. But she's an amazing visual designer and UX designer, and now she's also learning how to be a really good researcher,
That's a great
because she
point.
has some mentoring, because I'm there
That, that
now.
that's a that's a really great point, though, that like, sometimes we think we have to move on to another company, when the most straightforward way to do it is to look for opportunities to make that transition in the company you're already at. And a lot of the time you can get that support. Like it's I would go as far as to say that it's pretty common for like I've seen PMs become engineers. I've seen PMs become designers. I've seen designers become engineers, right? Like it's really fluid within a company. And so like, think about if there's an opportunity to do that and get support, where you're currently at before you decide to pivot.
Mhm.
I've got another question here. I'm early in my career as a UI designer, um, and I've started to focus on design systems, and as a result of that, no longer do feature design. Is there a danger of getting over specialized too early?
Oh, that's interesting. um, my answer to that would be probably more questions. Is there a danger to getting over specialized? People can get pigeonholed in a whole lot of different ways. I think the thing to look at is to not make your decision based on fear, but make your decision based on, is it, you know, what is the value to you, and what do you love to do? Is this
Mhm.
something that is an opportunity? You could end up getting specialized, and that ends up being the most awesome thing you ever did. like
Mhm.
then you are the one that everyone calls for that, and you know that advances your career. So that's how I've always looked at opportunities as they come about, is, you know, how is this going, am I going to learn something, what what am I going to be able to do differently based on what I learn, and
Mhm.
is it an interesting challenge to me? So you don't know the future, I don't know the future, so make your decisions based on you know um, what are you going to learn, and what'll be different for you as a result of that.
Thank you for that. Uh, that was awesome. I chat's getting a little nuts, but uh,
Uh-oh.
but this has been amazingly. I think that'll wrap up Q&A just because we are at time. I do want to take a second to talk about what you've got going on though, before we wrap up, because you do offer consultations, right? So can you tell folks a little bit about uh, what you've
Yeah,
got going on?
but I do, sure. I do, yes. So I do right now, I'm doing one-on-one coaching, leadership coaching. So I don't typically work with folks who are, right out of school. Although I certainly have. In fact, I'm working with someone who is freelancing and
Mhm.
trying to, really figure out what she wants to do. Um, I do, and what I like to say is I work with leaders at all levels to really identify their strengths and create a career that's aligned to their values,
Mhm.
and uses their entire capabilities. Um, so I, just like a boot camp, am not going to be able to get anybody a job. You have to get your own job. So, working with a coach, though, can help you really come to clarity, and it can be really helpful, especially when you're in a place where your confidence might be low. Um, it helped me when I was in a place where like I needed to create my narrative, and that was helpful for me to it made me it gave me someone to just ask questions, um, be that accountability partner, and
Mhm.
I was really, the insights were coming from inside me, right?
Mhm.
So the coach is your partner, you have the insights, but your partner sometimes can see things that you don't see.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, that is, and folks can find me on my website, which is arredondo.design.
And I'll make sure to send a link to everyone in the next couple minutes here. So everyone, explore Lee's offerings. She's got worksheets. She offers face-to-face time if you're looking for leadership consulting. And do me a favor, everyone. Make sure to go on Lee's LinkedIn and shoot her a direct message thanking her for her time, and extra credit if you let her know what you got out of this session.